All right, what is going on, everybody? How you doing? Welcome to another episode of Talking Buffalo, your weekday daily driver for Buffalo Sports Talk and more. My name is Patrick Moran. Thank you very much to everyone out there for listening to the show, for watching, following, subscribing, whatever you do, however you consume, and I appreciate you very, very much. Today's episode, as always, is presented by Sunny Reds, 1841 Ebbert Road in Lackawanna, just minutes down the road from Highmark Stadium. Elite wings, we talk about them all the time. Great food, great drinks, fun vibe. Also have karaoke, by the way. I don't know when they do it. It's on Saturdays. I don't know if it's once a month on Saturdays or every other Saturday, but I've been there the last couple times, and that shit has been fun. Off the hook, a really good time. Combination of some real singers, some people who are just there to party, old songs, new songs. A lot of fun. Go check out Sunny Reds, 1841 Ebbert Road in Lackawanna. All right, this is our midweek episode, which means, as usual, I am joined by my good buddy from SB Nation, Matt Warren. Matt, you know what? Are you a karaoke singer? If you and I were to go to Sunny Reds and they had karaoke this coming Saturday, am I going to be able to convince you to get up there and sing something or not?
Yeah, probably. I mean, I've never done karaoke to be clear. I've never done karaoke, but that's what my my undergrad and my master's were. I was a music teacher for 17 years before I took this job. I sang like all the time. I was a chorus guy, so like that was what I did. So yeah, if I'm not good at that, I don't know what I can even do anymore. So there you go. I won't have the longevity I used to have when you're singing all day every day with chorus kids. Like, you've got that really strong pipes going and the breath support and all that. But so I might not be good for a long time, but I'd be good the one time. You know what I mean?
What would be, like, you probably haven't thought about it much because you haven't done it. But like, if I weren't able to convince you to say, get your ass up there, man, we've just pounded a couple beers, and like, what would you consider singing? Like, what is something that you could potentially see yourself singing at karaoke? Something newer, something older? Like, what do you think would be in your wheelhouse of what you'd want to do?
Right. It would probably be something that I'm most comfortable with. So like a Springsteen song or something. But no, so like that's kind of more my wheelhouse. But yeah, I could cover a lot of bases depending on how lubricated we became. So. Yeah.
Well, you know what? Someday down the road, maybe we'll hook up at a Sunny
Bill
Red.
Shout song. Like, let's do the Bill Shout song. Do people do that at karaoke? Is that a thing?
God, I can't say that. It's a wedding thing. I don't hear it at karaoke anymore. I'm sure somebody out there definitely does do it. You obviously get good fan engagement. Speaking of too, by the way, so we're going to spend a chunk of this episode. We talked beforehand. Obviously, it's all about Denver. It's playoff time. It's tournament time. It's do or die. Any cliche that you could possibly come up with. But I want to spend some time on today's episode before we really get into the weeds of that over the next few days. Just spending some time and appreciating this 2024 regular season for the Buffalo Bills. It really turned out to be a special season. One of my favorites, actually, when it comes to this team. So we're going to kind of talk about that. You and I talked for a few minutes before we hit the record button here. We're going to get a chance to shit on the AFC East as well. You can never not have fun doing that. So that's what we're going to do before we get into Denver. You said when it comes to like singing a shout song, that would bring really engagement to the audience. I got to tell you this before anything else, dude. Something that brings engagement that I'm getting really sick of is the MVP talk. And you and I have talked about this ad nauseum for weeks and weeks and weeks now. The whole Josh versus Lamar thing, I'll tell you what, I'm throwing in the towel. I'm going to try. I'm done talking about it. I'm done tweeting about it. I really wish the MVP would be announced now. It's not going to be announced till I think the day before the Super Bowl. They had the NFL honors. So we're still going to have to hear about it now from other people for a couple more weeks. But I am just tired of talking about it. Anytime I put up a thought, a tweet, and obviously I do think Josh Allen's the MVP, as do you. We've talked about this several times now on this show. The response is whether you strongly agree or whether you strongly disagree. It always seems to be one or the other. And it's just ugly, and I'm over it. It's like an election, Matt. To win an election, if you and I are running against each other, one of us are going to be, mayor or whatever it may be, for me to win, I got to make my opponent, in this case, you, look lesser than. That's how
Mhm.
you win an election. And the supporters for Patrick for mayor are going to rally around me and they're going to throw some mud at you, whether it's deserved or not, and vice versa. That's just how it goes with these kind of things. And if it's an election based on respect, let's not talk about the Trump era. Let's go before that. Let's say Obama, McCain. They were going
Yeah.
at each other, putting each other down. Why am I a better candidate? Blah, blah, blah. When that election was over, nothing but love and respect from both of them towards each other. That's the way it should be, by the way. It's unfortunately, it's not anymore. You get my point, though. It's like you got to make the other person, you don't have a choice. If you're going to win, you got to do it to make yourself look better than the other
Mhm.
person. And no matter what your intention is, it gets ugly. So many other factors beyond just football get involved in it, and it's just tiring, dude. I don't know about you, but I am getting really, really sick of falling for the bait. Sometimes I create the bait, so I shouldn't say that. I'm guilty as well. But
Guilty. Guilty.
I'm tired.
Guilty.
I'm tired of reading about it. I'm tired of hearing about it. Just get it over with, man. Whoever wins, ain't it? At this point.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely guilty of creating them too. Like over the weekend, I threw out the fact that Josh Allen was able to clinch the 2 seed in 16 games and took Lamar Jackson 17 games. Just like it's the dumbest thing because I know that it's like it's an insincere post and it's just baiting, but just it's been a little bit fun. But like, hey, I'm definitely moving on to more important things.
It
Yes.
was fun for a minute, and I do like perspective. I like the fact that we're even arguing about who's the MVP, and your player from your team is one of the two guys is
Yeah.
just that in itself is incredible. But yeah, man, I am just literally over it, and I really hope the Bills playoff run keeps going for a few more weeks. One of the bigger low key reasons at this point now is going to be just because I won't care about any MVP talk as long as the Buffalo
Right.
Bills have a football game to look forward to. And of course, you could throw the MVP talk out the damn window next week, potentially, if the Bills can win and Baltimore can win. What better way to settle it than on the football field with a potential Buffalo Bills, Baltimore Ravens divisional round game? Bit of news, too. I just saw you actually quote tweeted before we started recording. We're recording this Tuesday, late morning, lunchtime ish.
Mhm.
Brian Gaine, Bill's assistant GM, has been requested to get an interview with the New York Jets. Or I said that wrong. The Jets have reached out to try to get an
Yes.
interview with him. We already know about Joe Brady as well. Um, what are your thoughts on this quickly here before we get into the season? Brady, not a surprise. Gain, maybe a little bit of a surprise, but not to many, not really to me. What are you thinking?
Well, right. I mean, Gain was previously the Houston Texans general manager, so he was in the Bills front office as assistant general manager. Left to become general manager of the Texans. Was fired there under some, I don't know, some very bizarre,
Mhm.
very secretive reasons. Came back to Buffalo in a front office role. Was promoted to assistant GM when Dan Morgan was hired to the Carolina Panthers. So the Bills, I mean, we talk about coaching trees a lot. We don't always talk about like GM trees, but it shows that Brandon Beane is putting together a really strong front office that so many of his underlings, for lack of a better term, keep getting uh, GM interviews over and over again. And he's not the first. He's not going to be the last. I mean, it's draft and develop in players, draft and develop with coaches, draft and develop with front office people too. So, that's why Joe Shane gets the Giants job. Dan Morgan gets the Panthers job. Brian Gaine gets the Texans job. Wouldn't surprise me at all if he gets the Jets job, especially if he's not getting other phone calls from other places like Tennessee or something like that. I mean, I would, and we'll talk about this later. I really wouldn't want to work for Woody Johnson personally, but if that's
Mhm.
your only opportunity, I mean, if you don't have your pick of the litter and you can, yeah, I would go there. So
Let's get ready to talk a little bit about Woody Johnson right now, because like
okay.
I said, this is for the most part, this is a Buffalo Bills regular season appreciation, pay homage episode here. Again, the season now becomes single elimination. All right. A bad Sunday, and that's a wrap.
Yep.
But before we get to that point where that's even a possibility, because if they lose on Sunday, I am going to be in a bad mood. I am not going to want to talk about what a great regular season this was, at least not for a while anyway. It'll take some time to digest, a tough wild card loss.
Mhm.
But before we can get to that point, I want to take advantage and take this opportunity to talk about like these past 4 months, which, by the way, I don't know, dude, you're busy. Is it, has it seemed to you like these last 4 months have just flown by? Like you've been doing this show with me now every week for pretty much the entire season.
Mhm.
It just feels like this season, I don't know, maybe it's just me. I don't know how everyone out there feels about it, but it feels like it's kind of like a blink of an eye, ain't it? At least to me, it was.
Yeah, I think it's gone a little bit faster than we've expected, and I think part of that. I mean, I'm sure we'll get into this. We're talking about like celebrating the team. Like there have been very few times when I've been like pissed off for a like extended period of time about this team. Like we've been generally in a pretty good mood when we record these on Tuesdays and release them on Wednesdays. So like I think that
Yeah.
does play a part of it too. Like I mean, we're not lingering on losses for a long time.
That's fair. Now to really appreciate the Bills this season, I feel like you kind of have to take a step back a little bit and look at the division around them and just
Yep.
how it completely imploded because the Bills are the one team this did not happen to. Let's start with the Jets. You mentioned Woody Johnson. All right. So this was a team that was supposed to be a lot of people. I remember PFF had them fifth in their power rankings going into
He
the
did.
season. And I believe they were the betting favorite to actually win the AFC East before the season. Well, obviously they went 5-12. They are a disaster. They are a perennial disaster. No quarterback. I don't think the quarterback was any good this year. Who knows who's going to be the quarterback next year? You mentioned Woody Johnson. He is the absolute worst owner, maybe in all of sports. The Jets are maybe the worst organization in all of sports. The Buffalo Sabres may have something to say about that. But you look at the season for the Jets. All right. So they started out 2-1. Okay. They were 2-1 after 3 games. And they lost 5 straight after that. And then they lost 9 of 10. Their offensive line, a disaster. They gave up 40 sacks. The defense, which has been their trademark over the last few years, kind of stunk. Will McDonald had double-digit sacks. Quinn Williams is always a good player, but the defense kind of stunk, which was probably the most surprising thing. They're in turmoil now. Aaron Rodgers almost certainly is gone. Devontae Adams will go with him. Hassan Reddick was a colossal disaster. What a terrible trade that turned out to be for them. I don't. I was going to say I don't know where to start with them, but I just feel like I just ran down a lot of shit right there,
You,
man.
you said a lot of things. Yes.
Yeah, then let's talk about the Jets for a second and just the shock that it was such a disaster. I do remember that everyone said, Zach Wilson was the quarterback. He was garbage. And oh, you had average
Yep.
quarterback with this team, and they're going to win 10, 11, 12 games. Well, Matt, they didn't.
No, they didn't. And that was actually the most surprising thing for me. I was a little bit worried about the Jets, not a lot of it, but at least a little bit worried about the Jets
Mhm.
because of what you just said. All they needed was like mediocre quarterback play, and they would be a much, much better team. And they did not get that from Aaron Rodgers this year. In fact, he was very similar to what Zach Wilson was the year before that. So um, I do want to push back, though, on their defense. I think their defensive prowess was covered up by how bad their offense was. If you look at some of their stats, they were third in yards allowed in the entire NFL. They were third in scoring percentage allowed. They just had an offense that kept giving the ball back to the other team. And so they were 20th in yards. So think about that
Yeah.
juxtaposition. 20th in yards given up and third in scoring allowed just because they were just so or sorry, yeah, 20th in points allowed and third in yards allowed. I got it backwards. Because they did such a good job, but had the other team had so many opportunities to score that their numbers are going to look a little bit depressed. So I think their defense was still probably about as good as it was the whole time. They just had nothing from the offense and just completely failed. And now they're hitting the reset button again, which I'm a little bit surprised by. I thought Robert Saleh was a very competent NFL head coach. If I was, I don't know if I'd hire him in this cycle, but I hope he gets another shot someday because I think
Yeah.
he was fine. Um, but yeah, the way that their roster was constructed, I mean, I'm more of a draft and develop guy myself, and so them relying so heavily on aging veterans and plug and play guys just didn't necessarily work. And it just goes to show you that like when you miss on a quarterback at the top of the draft, it can set you back for so many years, as the Bills saw with J.P. Lossman and E.J. Manuel, and now the Jets are seeing with well, Sam Darnold, but that's a different story. And then some of the other folks.
I'm glad you brought up Robert Saleh because
Mhm.
I believe now he was not the problem. I don't think he was the problem with this football team. Is it fair to say the Jets were the most disappointing team in the NFL this year? You think?
Yeah, I
I was
think that's
thinking them.
probably fair. Yeah,
Yeah, them maybe Frisco because I mean Frisco went to the Super Bowl last year. I mean they had a lot of
yeah,
injuries this year. The injuries was
they
a big factor, but
yeah. I mean, and I'm the 49ers were in a lot of those games. They lost some close games. They played a first place schedule where the Jets didn't. So like I think you can at least like give some caveats to the 49ers, whereas like the Jets were just bad and everyone expected them to be good. Like they did have that one win over the Houston Texans that people can point to as like, the one game they kind of put everything together. But you said they were 2-1 to start the season. They beat the Patriots and the Titans, and everyone's like, "Oh, they're going to be good." No.
I'm doing this in real time because you just triggered a thought in my mind with the
Okay.
Jets where I realized they sucked. This was the moment where I thought they sucked this year. It was a specific game.
Uh huh.
There's some irony in this though. It was week 4. Okay, they're at home. They are playing a rookie quarterback, Bo Nix, Denver Broncos team in New York, and they were 2-1, and they lost to Denver that game. I'm looking it up just to make sure I knew the score. 10-9.
Yep.
10-9, they lost to the Denver Broncos. And I'm like, the Jets are trash this year. Now, in fairness, the Denver Broncos ended up being a playoff team that the Buffalo Bills are going to be facing on Sunday. So Denver definitely turned their season around. But I thought Denver at that point in the season, I thought they were going to be a garbage team with a rookie quarterback who probably wasn't ready to be a starting quarterback. Kind of wrong on that. But anyway, I remember that game specifically as when the Jets sucked. And
The
look, dude,
offense definitely sucked that day. Like, definitely sucked because the defense only gave up 186 yards in that game. So, like, the fact that the Jets' offense sputtered so bad. I mean, yeah, the Broncos have a good defense. We'll get to them in a little bit. But, I mean, that's bad.
it's real bad. And the Miami Dolphins weren't much better, by the way. Let's have some more fun here. All right, so
Okay.
Miami goes 8-9. Now they won their opener. They lost to the Bills in week 2. Now, after they won their opener, they ended up losing 6 or 7 games. Now, injuries, especially to Tua, did definitely play a factor
Hmm.
for the Dolphins this year. But they lose 6 of 7, and they get themselves in a hole that they're never able to climb out of. There's a lot of issues with this team, and I kind of feel like they were the issues we saw last year and maybe the year before that as well. Tyreek Hill, which we all know by now, just pretty much quit on his team. All right. So I mean, he quit on his team after the game. He wants out, and he's kind of making that obvious at this point. Jalen Ramsey, I don't know what his future is. I saw he had an IG post earlier in the week that was a little bit puzzling. Hated the contract he got too. To his
Yep.
future, I mean, look, you have to wonder what his future holds between the concussions and then the hip issue. I mean, this was a critical point of the season where Miami needed him and he was unable to play. And then maybe the most surprising thing to me over this last week, they're sticking with their GM. Greer's back, and so is McDaniel. McDaniel, I don't think is surprising, although I would have moved on from him if I was Miami. And Greer's coming back, which shocks me. Miami's just not a tough team mentally, and we saw that again over the past couple of years. I don't like the way this team's built. Some bad contracts, and they don't beat good teams. They don't play well in the cold. I mean, it is what it is, and we see it all the time. And if you're a Miami fan, I don't know. You might even be in worse. Are you in worse shape than the Jets? It might be close because you got a quarterback in turmoil, a GM that just doesn't seem to get the job done. You're a soft team. You don't have good cap space. You're not going to have a
Right.
great salary cap situation. Got a lot of guys making a lot of money who maybe they shouldn't be. What are we thinking here? Is Miami isn't just as bad, maybe even worse shape than the Jets?
I could not be happier that they're keeping their general manager and head
Oh
coach.
God.
I could not be happier. Like, wonderful. Like, applaud. Let's do this. So I don't think they're in worse shape than the Jets just because the Jets are really tearing a whole lot of stuff down, and they don't have a quarterback even up to Tua's level. Like, they just, I don't know. I wouldn't want to be, and when he's calling people up and talking about Madden ratings when making personnel decisions. So
Mhm.
I know we talked about this whether it was last week or the week before. Like, it all starts at the head of the snake in this particular case. And so, if I'm a fan of the Cowboys, if I'm a fan of the Dan Snyder Washington football team, if I'm a fan of the Jets with Woody Johnson, like, the owners are the ones making the bad decisions, so they're the ones you can't get rid of. So I would rather be a fan of the Dolphins with an owner that at least understands business and all of these other things, as opposed to a guy like rooting for the Woody Johnson Jets, because I don't think, I mean, he certainly understands business. That's not what I was trying to say, but he doesn't
Right.
necessarily understand how to work the football side of the business, So I think there's more of a hopelessness with the Jets long term because of Woody Johnson than Stephen Ross down with the Miami Dolphins.
As we talk about these two teams, it just becomes more and more apparent to me that, I mean, we're not going to be talking about it for months to come, but the Bills should go into the 2025 season, I think, significantly being the best team, the best organization for
Oh
sure.
yeah.
Look, when it comes to Miami, I think one of my biggest things, I just don't believe in Mike McDaniel. I really don't. He's quirky, he can run some cute plays on offense. I'll give him that. No question about it. Like, if he were to be fired and Joe Brady were to leave, I would love for Mike McDaniel to come and be Josh Allen's offensive coordinator. But McDaniel's already staying. Who knows what happens with Joe Brady? But as a leader amongst men, I just don't think he's that guy. I've seen too many times where they just lose games to good teams. You got to get over the hump, and time and time again, they don't. And we saw it last year in the regular season finale. I'm like, if you don't beat the Bills last year in that finale, you're up at halftime.
Yeah.
I don't know when you're going to do it. In terms of New England, look, I mean, I don't put them on the same level as these other two teams because they weren't expected to be good this year. But I do think they're in better shape than the other two teams we just talked about.
Oh, yeah.
They're only four, so they finished 4-13. All right, that sucks, and they don't have any talent. Let's just keep it real here. They got the quarterback, like Christian Gonzalez. They got a handful of players who are pretty good, but all in all, this is a team very void of talent. They did blow the first overall pick, and I do think that's going to come back to haunt them some. Travis Hunter was in your lap where you could have traded out 2 spots and still got it in. Who knows how that plays out now? That said, though, I still think they're the best shape of the 3 teams because they do have the franchise quarterback. They do still have the 4th overall pick, and they got a ton, and I mean a ton of salary cap space next year. They got like $131 million, which, by the way, is the most in the entire NFL. We'll see what they do with head coach. I kind of get the Mike Vrabel's coming to New England vibes. We'll see how that plays out. But regardless of who they get, maybe Ben Johnson, who the hell knows? He's got the quarterback there. But they're in. If I'm a Patriots fan, is it fair to say if I'm a Patriots fan, I should be more optimistic about my team maybe than Miami and the Jets are about theirs?
Oh, I wouldn't think there's any doubt about that. You have an owner that knows what he's doing, so you're already ahead of the Jets. You have a quarterback that I think is better than Tua Tagovailoa in May. You've got a lot of cap space. You got at least a solid NFL personnel guy in Wolf. I think they have the pieces in place to turn it around faster than those other teams, especially now with the Dolphins keeping Greer and McDonald. And so I do like where the Patriots are in terms of their rebuild. They did need to pull it back a little bit, and they've done that. I think they kind of threw Jared Mayo to the wolves a little bit there, but again, if I'm a Patriots fan, well, maybe I shouldn't speak for Patriots fans because he was a player there, beloved guy there. But as an outside observer, I'd be happier as a Patriots fan getting rid of Gerard Mayo and bringing in a coach that I can get excited about as opposed to a legacy guy. Even if Vrabel's a legacy guy, I get that Vrabel's a legacy guy.
I think Gerard Mayo, from what I understand, and I don't know a lot about it, I didn't watch a lot of Patriots football this year. I'm not going to sit here and lie to people. Not a great job, but again, a lot of talent, and there was a lot of, I want to say, to some extent, dysfunction, disagreements on how the team should be run, a lot of management issues and things like that. But I agree fully, man. If I'm a Patriots fan, I feel better about my team than I do the Dolphins or the Jets for sure. Here's what I do. I'll take a real quick break, come back on the other side. Let's actually talk about the team that we do cover, the Buffalo Bills here. We'll talk about some of the reasons why this was such a special season, and then we will spend at least a few minutes anyway talking about the Denver Broncos. Matt Warren, SB Nation. I didn't realize it until we were doing it. I was like, I could spend a whole episode just shitting on the Miami Dolphins and the New York Jets, and it would not bore me at all. All right, so with the Bills, it feels so long ago to me right now that you go back to the spring and the expectations for the Buffalo Bills, what they were, let's just say around draft time-ish, all right? Because you lose a lot of I think they had, what, 6 captains? They lost 5 of them.
Mhm.
Guys just getting jettisoned right and left for various reasons. Trey White, Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer, Mitch Morse, Gabe Davis. And they didn't really sign anybody of note. Now, Matt Collins has turned out to be a great addition, but Curtis Samuel was the big name, and he hasn't really done much anyway. And Austin Johnson, it's like, okay, whatever, man. But, so that's in itself enough to make you wonder what's going on with this team. And then in April, this is where I think it becomes indisputable that even Brandon Beane at the time, Matt, said, we're not trying to not win this year, but we're more concerned about the future than anything else, because the big move is the very beginning of April, they trade Stephon Diggs. We don't need to talk about why. I think we all get a good sense of why. But to me, the interesting thing always was at that time what they got in return. They got a second-round pick, which, man, has turned out to look like a really good trade for the Bills in hindsight. But at the time, they trade and they get a second-round pick. But that's in 2025. Like, they're trading their best receiver, a guy who had 4 straight seasons of 100 catches or more, for a draft pick in the future, not even this year. So you kind of go back to that time, Matt, and talk about like your expectations then, especially once you get rid of Diggs and you get a future draft pick that ain't going to do nothing to help this team this year. It really, truly felt like it was going to be a transition year, rebuild, whatever term you want to use.
Yeah, Josh Allen's the MVP because of that, right? Like, sorry, I didn't want to bring it up again, but
No, you're
you
not.
know,
You're not
we
wrong.
we talked about the expectations. Like, I mean, obviously all off season and then heading into the first few weeks of the season, like the expectations were low. And I don't know if I don't know. Maybe we were too hard on Brandon Beane. I know we should trust him and all that other stuff because he's shown over and over again that they're capable of restocking and retooling. But like they had players in positions to step up. They had players, obviously Josh Allen and some of the other players that were ready to handle that load and shoulder that load. And I think it's really important that they can do that going forward. And this offseason, like you were talking about it, like they're going to go into this offseason as the favorite in the AFC East again. They're going to have more cap space to do stuff with. They're going to have, there's not a ton of like super obvious holes that they necessarily have to fill this offseason. It felt that way last season though, didn't it? Like it felt like they just had these massive holes that they had to fill, and they had a plan to do it, and it's worked really well for them.
You look at the roster and you talk about expectations then and what they've turned out to be. Obviously, we've far exceeded most people's expectation anyway.
Yep.
And I didn't think of it at the time. Obviously, as you're talking and we're having this conversation today, I'm thinking about it though. And it's like some of the best things that Brandon Beane did was kind of doing nothing in certain circumstances instead of spending big or investing heavy draft capital. I'll give you a couple of examples. And I think this is, very under the radar for the success of the Bills this season is they get rid of Mitch Morse. They they did hand David Edwards a starting guard job. I mean, they didn't sign anybody of any significance to even come to camp to compete with him. They didn't draft an offensive guard. So you're handing David Edwards a job and you're moving Connor McGovern from guard to center. Now, they did draft a center in the draft, but not to the 5th round. Who knows? Van Brand Granger may someday become a good starting caliber center. Who knows? But he certainly wasn't going to be that now. And you look at the Bills offensive line, and it was pretty much every bit as good as last year. Maybe you could even argue, in fact, you can argue that it was even better than last year. And they did so just by promoting David Edwards from, number 76 is reported as eligible. Now it's number 70 as reported as eligible this year. But they move him in the guard, start him, where he did start before in the past with the Rams, and they move Connor McGovern to center. That might have low-key been one of Brandon Beane's best decisions, or not just him, but, collectively as an organization, that I believe in my offensive line. I believe in these guys. Aaron Kromer's going to coach them up. So it's kind of like those decisions that he did that really helped, this team be what it is this season instead of overspending on a free agent or whatever that didn't work out. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. And there's no panic in Brandon Beane, or at least there's not any
Right.
outward panic. And we saw that a little bit with the Dolphins when they gave that contract extension to Jalen Ramsey. They gave that contract extension to Tyreek Hill, but they didn't really have to do those things just to make them happy and all this other stuff. We've seen obviously the Jets panic. Whether it's signing players or trading for players, and Brandon Beane, didn't panic when the thought of losing Mitch Morse came up, or the thought of losing Gabe Davis, or Micah Hyde, or Jordan Poyer, or Trey White. And I know that they instigated some of those moves, not necessarily having them leave, but like there wasn't that sense of like, how the heck are we going to do this? It was like, okay, well, this is what we've got to work with. How do we make it work? And Joe Brady and Josh Allen and Sean McDermott and Bobby Babich and all those guys have made it work to their credit. And it'll be interesting to see what we do this offseason, kind of when we can like reload a little bit and take a step back. And now he's got some more money and some draft capital to work with. Like, he's always talked about sustained success, Brandon Beane, that is. And I mean, he lives it. I love watching him as general manager of the Bills. I think he's one of the best in the league, and I will continue to say that to anybody who gives me a microphone like you.
Well, I'll tell you what. I mean, he's not perfect. No GM is. No GM should be above criticism. And there's certain things and aspects of this roster where you kind of wish you could go back to the spring and maybe make a different addition. One quick example, which hasn't worked out and obviously hasn't mattered this year because the Bills are where they're at, but signing Mike Edwards as a safety was just something that didn't work out. I mean, you feel like if you go back in time, maybe you could have gotten a better starting caliber veteran safety. And that was kind of a sore spot then, and it's been proven to be right. But yeah, so there's some things, but I really don't want to focus on that. Not today, anyway. Again, that'll be end of the season, kind of, evaluating the state of the roster type deals. This is kind of like an appreciation episode. My whole point is back in those days, there was no, and by the way, Chicago Bears just requested an interview for Joe Brady as well. So that's now 4 teams that have requested an interview for Joe Brady. Or did they already?
Oh no, I think 4 is the right number. It's I know the Jets have, the Saints did. Like, yeah, it's going to be probably every team with an opening by the end of it. So he can't interview until after the divisional round, and so that's why you're seeing Mike Vrabel's name everywhere right now, because he can interview. His contract with the Browns ended before Week 18, so that he could do all of his interviews like this week, and so that's why he's taking all these meetings initially, and it's really smart on his behalf. But yeah, like the coordinators that are still in, so like I think almost every single name I've seen as an interview has been a coordinator with a playoff team. Like Arthur Smith, I saw there was, the Bucs offensive coordinator, obviously the Lions coordinators, like all this stuff. So, I mean, I think most of the names I've seen are folks that can't interview for a while.
Sure. Now, when it comes to the season, all right, so what made this season, I said, one of my most enjoyable, what's special for me this regular season, at least anyway, is going back to what we just talked about, the expectations, the exodus of veteran core players, trading your best receiver and getting a future asset, no big splashy moves. It felt like and again, the Jets loaded up. Miami was a favorite. The Bills were second or third in a lot of projections. So that kind of makes the regular season feel even more special to me. And you want to talk about proving them wrong. It's what the Bills did this year. They're 13-4. And I even hate saying that because there's no way they lose to New England last week if they wanted to win that football game. So easily could have been 14-3. They could have set a record for franchise wins in a season, tied it as it was. Lots of just so many fun things to go over. I feel like I could do this for an eternity right now. They were undefeated at home for just the 3rd time ever. And the first time, I believe, since 1991, when they went to the Super Bowl, by the way. So you got that. They had an NFL record, 30 rushing touchdowns and 30 passing touchdowns. They tied an NFL record for the fewest turnovers in a full season with 8. They set franchise records with 63 touchdowns, 509 points. They gave up just 14 sacks. They tied an NFL record by having 30 points in 8 straight games. They led the conference in point differential. It just goes on and on, Matt. They beat the Chiefs. They beat the Lions. First team ever to beat teams that had two 15-win teams in the same season. Want me to keep going? I got more for you.
You do.
I got more for you, man. 13 guys caught a touchdown this year, tied an NFL record. James Cook tied O.J. Simpson's team record with 16 rushing touchdowns. And last but not least, as much as I don't want to see it, Josh Allen's probably winning MVP. I mean, it's pretty remarkable to just listen to some of that. And there's other stuff too that I didn't even hit on. Just what a special season this has been, ain't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it struck me while you were reading the list that so many of those were like offensive records and offensive things. And like you only mentioned some team things a couple times, which again, like, well, we'll get into that later, but like this offense has just been so truly special to watch, and it's never lost on me after sitting through some of those lean years. Holcomb, Kelly Holcomb, like anyway, but like just sitting through some of those lean years and now seeing what we do on a week in, week out basis. It's not lost on me where it could be lost on some of the younger folks, no offense to them. And then especially if they're only watching Bills games, like if you're not watching the rest of the league, you don't see how hard it is to do what the Bills do seemingly every single time they have the ball. The Bills go 3 and out and everyone's like, oh man, what's wrong? Like, and then you see like, I don't know. I'll just pick on Will Levis. Like Will Levis going 3 and out, like, in half of his drives. And, it's a blip for the Bills more than it is like, a regular occurrence.
You made me think of a fun little story here. So
okay.
Talking about appreciating this team now and how good this offense is and how often they score the football. I used to, and I would say this was during the first half of the drought. Okay. I used to get together, me and a handful of friends. We'd watch every Bills game, and we're drinkers. We were drinkers anyway. Some of us still are, but every time the Bills would score, we would do a shot. Like the Bills would score, it'd be a touchdown, even a field goal, safety, whatever. We get around our little kitchen island, whatever the bottle or bottles that we had there, and we would all do a shot. Well, during those days, some of those seasons, that team sucked so bad that we were sober after games, and we would have to come up with new ways to get drunk while watching Buffalo Bills football. I mean, I even remember one time the Bills were so pathetic, we created something called controversial call shot. Like if there was a referee that made a controversial call, we're like, hey, that's a shot. Because that was the only way you're going to get drunk. If your goal was to pound some shots and watch the Bills play football and you were doing score shots, you'd have to resort to turnovers. Again, controversial calls. You would just make shit up to be able to do shots. This year, I don't know if you played that game or anyone out there played that game with their people. I didn't, thank God, because I wouldn't be getting up on Monday half of the season because I would have been wrecked. I mean, this team scored 30 points or more 8 games in a row. So week after week, you'd be having a Sunday drinking problem if you played that game with the Buffalo Bills, especially this season, man. It just, you started bringing up Kelly Holcomb and just some of these scrubby quarterbacks. And it just took me down memory lane. It's like, God, this team used to stink. And they would never, ever be exciting on offense. And now it's like, don't blink your eyes. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, there was a 2-week stretch there where you would have been a puddle for like,
that Rams Detroit would been a rehab after those 2 games, man. Holy shit.
Bad.
Josh Allen had 6 touchdowns. He would have had courtesy 6 shots just him by himself. It's just, I don't know what's, of those stats, I don't know what impresses me the most. I think it's beating the Kansas City and Detroit of all the stuff that I ran off. There's some times where you could be 13-3 for a season and you just really haven't. And the Bills didn't beat a shitload of great teams. I mean, so let's be a little careful about that. It's not like they ran the gauntlet of the toughest schedule in NFL history here. But to me, the most fun thing, and I've said this before, the thing that, well, one of 2 things. I think when it comes to Josh Allen in the MVP case is doing more with less, which that's obvious. But also those 2 games, when you beat the Chiefs and you beat the Lions, and Josh Allen is not only the winning quarterback, but he's literally the AFC Offensive Player of the Week in both those games. To me, that really solidified his greatness. I remember Mike Greenberg, who's a big New York Jets fan, not a Bills fan, going on ESPN after that 4-game stretch and saying that that was the best 4-game stretch he's ever seen any quarterback play in the history of the NFL ever. You remember that?
I do remember. And Greenberg, he hasn't been like a Bills lover or a Bills hater really over the
Right.
years. He can be objective as much as he leans towards the Jets in his topics that he picks. But like for him to say that, I thought was very interesting because I've read 2 of his books. Like that guy knows the history of sports, the history of the NFL in particular. And if he's saying that, then it really does hold a lot of weight for me. He's not, you know, some of these other talking heads that are on TV that are just spouting crap. Like I know he knows his crap when it comes to NFL history, and so for him to say that, it was a really, really big day for me. But I agree with you that Kansas City and Detroit beating those 2 teams is the biggest stat off of that because, especially when we're recording this now, as they're making that push towards the Super Bowl, it gives me the hope that they can beat literally anybody in the league.
Yeah.
And there's no reason to think that they can't win the Super Bowl this year based on just that one stat alone. Like 30 rushing touchdowns, 30 passing touchdowns, cool. But they beat the best 2 teams in the league, at least based on record. And so you have to think that they can beat every team in front of them from here on out. And it should give Bills fans that hope.
When they walked off the field against Detroit, I said to myself, this team absolutely can win the Super Bowl. And I felt very confident about it. In fact, I'll take it a step further. I was like, this team should win the Super Bowl after Detroit. Now, maybe I got a little too high on my own supply after one regular season game, but that's the way I felt. Being in Kansas City was awesome. That said, they've done it the last 2 years in a row before this season, during the regular season. So wasn't really shocking, but to go into Detroit and win and have Josh be the AFC Offensive Player of the Week and just dominate that football game, that was the moment where I'm like, you know what? This is a legitimate Super Bowl team. This isn't just a fun little surprise season anymore. This is a team that absolutely can win the Super Bowl. One of the things, and we didn't really, I kind of throw at you what we're going to hit on during the show. Didn't really mention this to you, but now that I'm looking at it, so I talked about the offensive line, like low key being one of the most important things because your offensive line's not good. You're an offense ain't going to be good. Look no further than the New York Jets. But what would be like, when you look at the stats from the season and the accomplishments, what are like 1 or 2 things that might pleasantly surprise you the most? Like maybe individually too. Not, we talked about a lot of team stuff, but is there like 1 or 2 things that you look at the stats for the season that you're like, whoa, I didn't see that coming, that will like really pleasantly surprise you?
I mean, I was really surprised when the turnover numbers dipped so far. Like,
Oh,
I mean, I know that there were some turnover worthy plays that didn't, necessarily go for the opponent's way. But I mean, to have fewer than 10 turnovers in the entire season is it's a ridiculously low number. And it really does go to show how good the offensive line was and how good Josh was at avoiding pressure. Because like one of those fumbles that they lost was on that stupid flea flicker pass thing. Like, I mean, the, if you keep him in the pocket, he's good. Like,
and you're right. And another turnover that they lost was one that was literally in Keon Coleman's hands. It popped out of his hands into a defender.
Yeah.
That's 25% of your turnovers.
One.
That's 25% of your turnovers for the season, dude.
Turnovers are luck. I know in a lot of ways, but like the fact that your offensive line keeps Josh clean and Josh can avoid, when there is a free pass rusher and he can do the dead leg and get to the outside to throw some of those, MVP passes that we've been talking about it's just so important. But like very few putting the ball on the ground in the run game, very few boneheaded decisions that are just bonehead decisions that, we can't really I hate the term arm punt, for the record. I hate it, but like, it's not the worst decision as opposed to like, I don't know, throwing it into triple coverage against the Jets in week 1 of the 2023 season. Like those are bad decisions. Like we didn't see that. And so again, that was probably like just seeing it swing so far the opposite way. Like I thought it would get better, but I just didn't expect it to get under 10 better,
Sure. So pleasant surprise is this, in a good way. I never thought in a million years that James Cook would have 16 rushing touchdowns this season.
Okay.
After I think he had maybe 2 last year, something like that. He literally tied O.J. Simpson's franchise record. And this sounds like a negative stat, but if you would have told me before the season started, 2 things. And again, this is literally a record-setting offense for this franchise, okay? And if you would have told me that was going to happen with these two numbers, I would have said you're nuts. A, Mac Hollins leads this team in touchdown catches with just 5. Okay, so
Right.
you got that. And before the season, you would have been like, yo, this passing offense was prolific this year. I would have been like, go get me a Dalton Kincaid All Pro or Pro Bowl jersey because he's going to be a stud this year. Dalton Kincaid, 44 catches, 448 yards, 2 touchdowns. Didn't matter. It didn't matter. They're still the most prolific offense that they've ever had in the history of the franchise, with their first round pick just being almost having a pedestrian type season.
Yeah, and then how many passing yards did Josh Allen have this year?
I don't know. I'd have to look it up.
It's 3,731. It's not 4,000. It's not 4,500 passing yards. If you had told me he was going to have less than 4,000 passing yards, I would have been shocked. And that's not saying, oh, well, he sat out the 17th game. He would have needed a 300-yard game to get to 4,000 against the Patriots, which, he obviously is capable of. But, he sat for 11 quarters of the season. I get that, all that stuff. But, the fact that they have such a prolific offense with Josh Allen throwing for under 4,000 passing yards is just, again, mind-boggling stat.
Yeah. We got a few minutes left here. I'm just going to ask you a straightforward question here. So for weeks and weeks, we've been talking about who we want to play, who you don't want to see the Bills play in the playoffs. Obviously, it was Cincinnati. We've been tracking Cincinnati since before the halfway point of the season. Well, they're not playing Cincinnati. They're playing the Denver Broncos, the team that most thought would happen. The map said it was going to happen, and it did happen. So just straightforward, what are your thoughts? Now it's here. The Bills are playing the Broncos. What are your thoughts on Denver? What are your thoughts on this matchup?
I don't think it's going to be as easy as other people think it might be. I think the Broncos have a very, very good defense that is capable of limiting Josh Allen as much as Josh Allen can be limited. They can keep him in the pocket. They know how to do that. Vance Joseph does a great job as a defensive coordinator out there. They were 5th in points allowed, 6th in turnovers. They have given up a lot of yards, but they're just so consistent play in, play out. 3rd in net yards per passing attempt, 2nd in rushing yards per attempt. So on a per play basis, they are very, very stout, but they had a rookie quarterback who had some turnovers. And so their cumulative stats are a little bit skewed because of that, just like we talked about with the Jets defense, actually. So they're a very good defense, play in and play out. And they should give people a little bit of pause. Now, Sean McDermott has built his entire career on being, this defensive mastermind kind of guy. If he allows a rookie quarterback in his first NFL playoff start to come in and run roughshod over this Buffalo Bills defense, that's going to be a very big problem. So this is more of a Sean McDermott game for me than it is a Josh Allen game, because he really needs to do a game plan that's going to shut down Bo Nix and that Broncos offense.
I couldn't agree more. Could not agree more. Look, with respect to Denver, their defense is really good, man. They got maybe the best corner in the NFL. They got a guy in Benito's got 13.5 sacks. Cooper's got 10.5 sacks. Zach Allen may be a all-pro defensive tackle. They're good. All right.
Mm-hmm.
That said, they've been kind of like the Jets, like Miami, but way better than Miami. But my point is they just beat the shit out of shitty teams. And they've not played well against teams with winning record this year. That said, they should have beat Kansas City in Kansas City earlier in the season. With respect to them, okay, I'm not as concerned about Denver as I am concerned about how Buffalo plays. There's kind of a few things that scare me. Slow start scares me. The Bills have been prone to starting slow, whether it's the defense giving up a touchdown to figure out what the offense is going to do and then making some adjustments, whether it's the offense getting off to shitty starts and then progressively getting better throughout the game. You don't want to mess around with that in the playoffs. But when I look at this offense with the Bills, I'm very confident in them, even against a good defense. And I remember, look, Denver, again, I don't want to disrespect Denver by comparing them to Tennessee, who's literally got the first pick of the draft. But if you remember when the Titans came to town earlier this season, it was all about, well, that offense kind of sucks, and the Denver offense doesn't suck, but the defense was incredible. Tennessee, by every metric, was right near the top, and the Bills had no issues with them. So I'm not really concerned about what their numbers are coming to game. Again, although I know there's more talent, but I am concerned about this. The Bills defense this season, like I'm confident in the offense. That's what I was saying about Tennessee and using that. Confident that the offense can do damage. What I'm not confident in right now, to be honest with you, is the defense because it's been fun to track during the season. A lot of luck involved, like you said, some skill, but this defense feels too reliant on turnovers and takeaways right
There.
now. And if Bo Nix is careful and if Bo Nix doesn't turn the football over and, they're running the football, whatever, my biggest question for Sunday is Sean McDermott. You kind of alluded to this and you're 100% right. The defense, can they make stops? Can they get off the field? Can they hold Denver, when it's 3rd and 6, getting off the field, even if they're not getting turnovers? Can they get a big sack? Can they flip the field? You know what I mean? All kinds of things with the defense if it's not a 3 turnover game. Now, obviously, they're very capable of getting 3 takeaways against Denver. But if that doesn't happen, is this defense, can it play good enough to just straight out, slow Denver down and get them off the field on 3rd and 4th down? That to me scares me because I have not seen a Bills defense, quite frankly, if you take the turnovers away, that has played very good this season, as crazy as that might sound.
No, that's exactly right. They live and die by the turnovers, and they get them in the right spots, and that's how they blow out teams. And when they don't get them, it turns into a track meet against the Los Angeles Rams or Detroit Lions. And so they are very reliant on turnovers. But again, they're playing a rookie quarterback. Can they bait him into making a bad decision? He had 2 picks in both of the last 2 games against the Seahawks. Wait, I'm looking at the wrong thing. Sorry, I was looking at the wrong. He started the year with 2 picks. He didn't end it with 2 picks. So he threw 3 interceptions against the Colts. Like, I mean, he threw. Sorry, yeah. So like, there's games where he can get uncomfortable, and the Bills need to make him uncomfortable. But at the same time, I think the Bills are going to play him a lot like they play Lamar Jackson. They're going to try to keep him in the pocket, try to keep him from creating with his legs because he can be very dangerous running the ball. So they're going to try to keep him a little bit contained. And they usually take some speed off that fastball when they're trying to keep guys contained, just trying to keep him in the pocket to make a mistake from there instead of trying to create outside of the pocket. And so they might not get sack numbers, but if they can get pressure on him, if they can keep him in the pocket and then bait him into making some of those throws he doesn't necessarily love to make, then they can get those turnovers, but they do live and die by that turnover.
Yeah, look, there's a lot of things. At the end of the day, there's a lot of things that have me very optimistic. I do think the Buffalo Bills are the better football team, even though Denver's got some really talented players on defense. They're at home. They've done it before. They've been in the wild card round a bunch of years. They've won a first playoff game a bunch of years in a row. You got an MVP caliber quarterback. There's lots of factors and reasons. Sean McDermott typically does really well against rookie quarterbacks. So there's lots of things, but there is some paranoia in me. Not going to lie. Denver, the weather's not going to be an issue. If it's 30, if it's 5, if it's snowing, if it's windy that day, whatever, that's not going to bother Denver at all. And they do have a head coach who's literally won a Super Bowl. So they might not have been in the playoffs in a very long time, but they do have a head coach who knows what it takes to get to and win a Super Bowl. So I'm not getting overconfident, but
they've been shaky in the wild card round for a couple times too. So it's not like they should be taking anything for granted. They had a close game against the backup quarterback for the Miami Dolphins a couple of years ago. Obviously, they smoked the Patriots in the perfect game that one year, but they almost got. The Colts had a Hail Mary chance at the end of the game a couple of years before the other one. So like there have been some close games under this Sean McDermott, Josh Allen regime in the wild card. So they really hopefully won't take anything for granted in this game.
I will say this. I think this is the most competitive wild card round game the Bills have had during the Josh Allen regime. Last year was the Mason Rudolph quarterback Steelers. The year before that was the Skylar Thompson quarterback Miami Dolphins. I never felt threatened like, oh shit, the Bills could definitely lose this game. I didn't know the Bills were going to run roughshod on New England quite like they did. But still, it didn't feel like New England was going to be a team that was going to come to Buffalo and knock them off in the first round. Denver is a better team than any of the teams they've faced over the last handful of years. Like I said, during his Josh Allen run. Injury-wise, the Bills are about as healthy as it could get
Mhm.
realistically going into the playoffs. Brandon Codgerton has an hamstring injury, hurt that in the Patriots game. It's the only injury of note that McDermott mentioned earlier in the week. We'll see how that progresses. I would certainly assume if he can't go, Ty Johnson will return punts, and you probably activate Kyrie Elam, who's been inactive. When everybody's out there for the corners, he probably would be active. Nothing new on Terrell Bernard. He did say he was trending towards playing or being fine, like late
Yeah.
last week, earlier this week. I think he's going to play.
Yep.
Two things that, in terms of the starting lineup, that are interesting to me. One of them going to the Patriots game here. Matt Milano did not see the field, didn't play a snap. To me, that tells me Sean McDermott says you're good to go. You're ready to
Yep.
go. If he needed work, he would have got work. Conversely, Damar Hamlin played every single snap on Sunday. Every snap. And that got me thinking there might be a controversy. Is it going to be Hamlin? Is it going to be Cole Bishop? There is no controversy. Sean McDermott did say Damar Hamlin is going to start. And I'm going to tell you what, I'm not a Damar Hamlin guy, and that's well known, but I actually agree with it because Damar will do one thing and one thing only well. That's it. Ain't nobody getting behind him. It hasn't happened this season. I don't need
Mhm.
Cortland Sutton catching a 65-yard touchdown or Marvin Mims going down the sideline. Nobody's gotten behind him all season. People have beaten Cole Bishop. I like Cole Bishop, and his future looks bright. I'm good with that decision, even though I'm not a great big Damar guy. Higher floor, low ceiling. Cole Bishop kind of like the opposite. You kind of feel the same. Like, is Damar starting the right choice for you?
I think so, and especially because he's played so long this season. It didn't surprise me he played so many snaps against the Patriots, and I would probably put him in. Like, I tend to go with the veteran in the playoffs anyway, just because the speed is so different. We talked about the speed, and that's why I wanted Hamlin to play last week. Going from preseason to regular season, then regular season to playoffs, you just get this bump in play speed. And Hamlin has that experience, and I would rather go with him. Um, the one thing we didn't talk about because it's not an injury, we haven't heard about Amari Cooper's status for Sunday yet,
Yeah.
and he's been out with the personal issue that we don't seem to know anything about right now. When he missed the Patriots game, I didn't think too much of it. When he wasn't there again on Monday, I'm like, okay, maybe this is a thing, especially because Sean McDermott was very, I don't know, wishy-washy about whether Cooper was going to be back. He said, I hope so, which, again, I also hope so. So I'm hoping that Cooper is back at practice on Wednesday, and whatever personal issue he was dealing with ended the way it should end, and hopefully everything's good on his end. I certainly don't begrudge him, leaving to attend to a personal issue. Um, Especially without knowing what it is. Like, I wouldn't
Right.
want to question him at all. But so hopefully everything's resolved there, and he's back in the starting lineup for this game.
Yeah, hopefully when people are listening to this sometime on Wednesday, we have resolution to that and he's back in the building. I certainly hope so. I don't want to say I anticipate it because we never know. We don't know what's
Yep.
going wrong, but hopefully, like I said, this is just talking on a Tuesday and hopefully on Wednesday there's complete resolution to that. One last thing too. So I'm treating this Denver game. It's an important game. You lose, you go home. So obviously it's important, but it's part of the bigger picture. Like last year, the Bills won the battle but lost the war, I feel like, in the divisional round. And what I mean by that is this: they beat Pittsburgh, but Terrell Bernard and Christian Benford
Mm.
got hurt, and they were not able to play against the Chiefs. And I will go to my grave that if Terrell Bernard plays that game, the Bills beat the Chiefs. I truly feel that that's how bad AJ Klein was last season, let alone Christian Benford, who is a fantastic corner. So it's not even just winning this game. Win this game and don't have any crazy injury that's going to really screw them up, potentially going against Baltimore, Houston, or the Chargers in a divisional round. I know that sounds like, one game at a time, but I can't stop thinking about that last year. Not to mention Rasul Douglas hobbling around on one leg against the Chiefs in the divisional round. Injuries, and Von Miller was a washed up Von Miller last year.
Mhm.
Don't have that this year. Keep it that way because that really held the Bills back. And I still think that's the reason why they lost in the divisional round last year. People don't talk about that enough. So win the game and come out at least reasonably healthy as well. Last thing, then we're going to let you go. Any the rest of the NFL, any of these playoff games around the league, anything stick out to you? Anything really intriguing to you in this first round? There's one thing that we didn't talk about. I do want to bring up, but let me ask you that first.
Okay. I don't know. I'm interested to see. if Houston can mount like any sort of attack here. They haven't beaten a team that finished the year with a winning record since beating the Bills in October. So they haven't. It didn't take a lot for them to make these playoffs, and so if the Chargers can beat them, like that's an interesting matchup both for Kansas City, but also like down the road with some other stuff. I'm interested to it's always interesting to me when division opponents play each other in the playoffs. Mike Tomlin has shown over the years that he knows how to defend Lamar Jackson, although they did not do that in their most recent game against each other. They did in the first game. So, like, which one of the Steelers teams is going to show up to play the Ravens this week? So those two things are like, the big thing. And obviously those are the other two AFC matchups. And so I'm leaning more towards those. I think the other games are going to be, pretty fun. Like, getting to see Jaden Daniels in his first NFL game is going to be really cool. The Packers and Eagles, like I really wish Christian Watson didn't get hurt, because that would have been a really fun game to watch. I think could come down to it. And then the Vikings and Rams. I think it's going to be a fun little offensive game too, even though Minnesota's offense did not do great against the Lions on Sunday night.
Quickly here, I'll say this. I know a lot of people out there, and I get the concept, and in theory, I think it's right. It's always tough to play a divisional opponent. It's always tough to beat a team. You got to play a team 3 times. I get all that. I still think Baltimore is going to boat race the Steelers. I think the Steelers are completely and absolutely done. They're imploding. So I'm not really even thinking much about that. I am intrigued about Houston and the Chargers. I'd like to see the Chargers win because I think they have a much better chance of beating the Chiefs than the Houston Texans do in Arrowhead. So I will be a Chargers fan for that game. Plus, if I'm wrong by some kind of miracle, and Pittsburgh does beat Baltimore, that would set up a fun Bills-Chargers divisional round. And then quickly on the other side, Green Bay choking against the Bears and having to go to Philly now probably cost them a chance to get deeper into the playoffs. And the thing I wanted to bring up that I thought was interesting here as we conclude, McVay's strategy last week, because if they beat Seattle at home, then they get Washington and a rookie quarterback in the first round. But he rests Stafford and Williams and Puka and Kupp and Verse and other guys, and they lose. And now they got to face the 3-loss Minnesota Vikings in the first round. Are you a little bit surprised about that? Because clearly McVay decided, I'm not risking the health of any of my star players, to me is more important, or not risking, I should say, is more important than a potential easier first round matchup. We'll be at home regardless, but I think Minnesota, with respect to Washington, I think Minnesota is a much tougher out than Washington. And McVay decided to not risk any of his key starters and pretty much concede that game to, and now they're playing the Vikings. I don't know how I feel about that if that was the Bills and Sean McDermott. I guess that's what I'm saying.
I at least understand his thought process, because we've seen what the Rams can do at full go when they have all their guys. But we've also seen what the Rams can do when one of those or two of those guys are injured, which is what happened at the beginning of the season, which is why their record's so lousy.
Sure.
If I'm the Rams, I'm much more interested in getting everybody fully healthy and going into the playoffs than facing Minnesota versus Washington, because I think Washington's a really good team too. So, I mean, yeah, I think Minnesota's probably better, like on the whole, than Washington, but I don't know if it's different enough where I'd play it differently like that. Like, I wouldn't want to play the Eagles. Like, if I'm the Packers, that was a big face plant, like to your point that you made, because like I wouldn't. Yeah. Philadelphia could beat you so many ways. I mean, notwithstanding whatever's happening with Jalen Hurts and the concussion protocol, but like they can beat you so many ways that I would have tried to avoid them and not let the Bears beat me in Green Bay. But that's a different thing.
Well, I'm anticipating an exciting weekend of wild card football. I am, to be completely honest, hoping that I'm not. I don't need the Bills game to be exciting. All right, unless you're looking at it from a one side point of view. I don't need it to be a 1-score game in the fourth quarter. I'd like to have a little less stress for this game, because you goddamn know if they play the Ravens, that stress is going to start when you wake up. If they're playing the Ravens in a divisional round, if the Bills are fortunate enough to win this week, that stress is going to start the minute you wake up Monday morning. I guarantee it. It's going to for almost everybody, but it's a stress that we hope to have, Matt Moran.
Oh, yes.
We will see. Make sure you follow Matt on Twitter and Blue Sky at Matt Rich Warren. Check out SB Nation, a one-stop shop, of course, for all football, not just Buffalo Bills. You'll be on with me next week. Again, hopefully we'll be doing an AFC divisional semi-preview and not putting a bow on the Bills 2024 season. Appreciate you as always, bud.
Have a good one.